What's going on, my friends? This is Rick the Fat Man, and welcome back to your seat at the table. Just a little brief slobbering in part on my part. Should have drank that before I started the video. Anyhow, we're all familiar with, well, most of us should be anyway, familiar with the concept of the sandbox, the open game world, more a concept of where we don't constrain ourselves with things like very specific modules and gameplay. We're not going to sit here and say, okay, this is the format we're following. We're going to keep ourselves, or we do to some degree, but we utilize bits and pieces of it, and we allow ourselves the opportunities to create and to play out and to go various directions. The players have much more input in a sandbox creation. A lot of video game concepts today tout themselves as being sandbox oriented, where you can pretty much go in any direction and do things and not do things, etc., etc. One of those game systems that lends itself, in my opinion, Star Wars is an example, a great example of a great sandbox opportunity game. There's so much to do and so many different things you can do that you do not have to follow the more or less the company line. You do not have to be a Jedi or a rebel or an Imperial, or you can be a bounty hunter or a smuggler or a transport pilot. You can pick a planet somewhere and have an adventure. I mean, there's plenty of novels that lend itself to that sort of information. Your characters can go off on tangents if you're careful and creative as a game master, as a storyteller. You're able to bend with it, bend with the wind, and try to anticipate the unexpected when it comes to your players. After a while, you get an idea what they want, what they're trying to achieve. So the possibility that you can go off the script is a given. A lot of role-playing game systems, that's kind of the gist of it altogether. If you just sat down with just the core book, a player's handbook, maybe a monster manual or bestiary or whatever, and a game master's book, but in some aspects the game master book isn't necessary. That's a player handbook and a monster manual. We're talking Dungeons and Dragons, pretty much everything you need right in those two books, and you can create and go off on wild tangents and not need a whole lot of structure. Miller is a great example, another great example of a possible sandbox. Now, one of those things that I I agree with most people in their concept of a sandbox game or a sandbox campaign, is that the general concepts of what they're trying to achieve. But I also have to remind them that we're talking a sandbox. So there actually is form. There actually is a set of laws or physics, if you will. There's a framework from within. The campaign can be whatever it wants, but it stays within the framework. This is one of the reasons we use the term a sandbox. Well, there's actually walls, structure. So we don't spill over that structure or out of that theme or that meme and become something totally abstractly absurd. Now, if that's your play, go for it. It was one of the things I didn't like about riffs in the early days, and I misunderstood riffs a lot. It's apples and oranges. You can only own, most of us can only afford to own so many games, and you get involved in this or you just kind of dabble. So you can dabble, have many game systems where you bought one or two books and then that was all there was to it. Or you could do like me, where when I got into a system, I bought as much stuff that came out as often as I could afford to. So with Middle Earth, I have pretty much everything of the original Iron Crown Enterprises put out until they started coming out with second edition material. At that point, I had transitioned over to BattleTech and some other game systems, and I just didn't have the money to spread that widely. So having said that, we have a constraint, the box, as opposed to, say, an open world beach. In this case, everything goes. When I thought of Rifts in the early days, it was this: we would just leap around. One day you're in a fantasy setting, the next day you're in a space setting with the same characters. And maybe I just missed, my friend who was running it misunderstood it, or I misunderstood it. I just didn't get into it very well. So the thing is, some systems are better than others for this kind of concept. With Middle Earth, in my case, I have all the excess material that I do that goes with this, all these different modules in game source books and things like this. I can then have my player characters play in Middle Earth, and they can choose a timeline anywhere in the world, or anywhere in the history of Middle Earth. And for the most part, I have something that can be related to it. And since there's such a wide range of areas, they can also pick pretty much any location in Middle Earth to start from their campaign. And they can move about, they can travel. In part, that's what these modules imply. If you look at from character development, let's look at Aragon as a character. In his younger years, he traveled some. He went to the east and he went to the south, to some, how far, and then we never was told, but we know he did. And he spent some time in the with the Rohirrim. He fought some campaigns with Gondor for Dinthar's father. It just goes to show you how old Aragon is in in book terms. He was older than Denthor. Denthor was an old man, so Aragon was in his middle age at the time of the War of the Ring, and he had seen and done quite a bit, and allowed him to have a wider view of the world. Having a lot of those modules and game materials for a particular sandbox means that you have reference material and place material for your players. So if they choose to go do something, you are much easier to accommodate that choice, unless instead of firing from the hip and making things up as you go. One of my viewers made a comment on my previous, I think it was one of my earlier modules reviews for Middle Earth, and commented that it would be interesting to see how things interacted on a wider scale at that time period. So in the majority of the Middle Earth role-playing game stuff is set in the year Third Age, 1640. That's 4 years, roughly 4 years after a great plague has decimated large sections of western Middle Earth, and yet Arthedain is still around and kicking. Angmar is still around and kicking. The Shire just has been settled within the 40 years of 1640, and there are still some aspects that are quite conducive. So things are going on in this while the players are playing here at the same time. In another section of Western Middle Earth, they're dealing with other issues. So if you're playing 1640 in Bree, Gondor's dealing with the aftermath of the plague and another incursion of Easterlings or Southrons. I'm not quite sure. I had to go back and look. There's other problems going on in the world. The dwarves are still occupying Moria. They haven't settled Erebor. They haven't moved to the north. The dragons are still in the north, but there's fighting and stuff going on all over the place. So there's a lot of things connected. It's just an idea of the sandbox having some structure and some concept of framework, so the players don't stumble around. They're not constrained to follow the script per se, but they still follow the theme or the flavor of the game system or the world setting you're choosing to play your sandbox in. Yeah, I'm kind of bumbling around here, so we'll just leave it at that. Till next time, my thoughts.